Our topic is all about fractions. A fraction simply tells us how many parts of a whole we have. Just like this example, 1 over 2 or 1 half. This whole thing is a fraction. 1 is the numerator. It is the top half of the fraction, the number of parts you have. 2 is the denominator. It is the bottom half of the fraction, the number of parts in a whole. The line that separates the numerator and the denominator is called the fraction bar. What does this fraction mean? If we will look at this pizza, the denominator or the bottom number tells us how many slices to slice the pizza. And the numerator or the top number tells us how many of those slices we can have. So 1 half tells us that we have sliced our pizza into 2 slices. And we can take one of those slices. Isn't that half of the pizza? So 1 half of a pizza is half a pizza. Now that's a pretty big slice. Now let's talk about the concepts to remember about fractions. 1. The denominator can never be equal to 0. For example, 12 over 0 does not exist. 2. A fraction with a numerator of 0 equals 0. No matter how big the denominator is, if the numerator is 0, it will always be equals to 0. For example, 0 over 4 equals 0. And 0 over 156 equals 0. Let's talk about improper fractions. If the numerator is larger than the denominator, it is called an improper fraction. Now let's find the improper fraction. We have 7 over 11, 10 over 8, 4 over 9, 56 over 73, and 10 over 12. Which is the improper fraction? That's right. 10 over 8 is the improper fraction because the numerator 10 is larger than the denominator 8. Now let's go to the 4 basic functions with fractions: multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. Let's have multiplication first. We have 2 steps in multiplying fractions. First, multiply the numerators and put in the numerator of the result. Second, multiply the denominators and put in the denominator of the result. Let's have this example. 7 over 8 times 4 over 9. Multiply the numerators 7 times 4 equals 28. Then multiply the denominators. 8 times 9 equals 72. So the answer is 28 over 72. Now let's go to the second function of fractions, which is division. In dividing fractions, you have to keep in mind 3 words: keep, change, flip. The first step is keep. You have to keep the first fraction. Second step, change division to multiplication. Third, flip the second fraction, or what we call the reciprocal. For example, we have 3 over 8 divided by 1 over 2. So you have to keep the first fraction. So 3 over 8 will be the same. Change division to multiplication and get the reciprocal of 1 over 2. So it will be 2 over 1. Multiply the fractions. 3 times 2 equals 6. 8 times 1 equals 8. So we have 6 over 8. Third and fourth functions of fraction are addition and subtraction. They almost have the same steps. First, you have to add or subtract the fractions, but you have to make sure they have a common denominator. Second, copy the denominator. Third, add or subtract the numerator. Now let's have this example. This is an addition problem. 1 over 6 plus 4 over 6. They have the same denominator, so you can just copy the denominator. Then, add the numerators. 1 plus 4 equals 5. So the answer is 5 over 6. We mentioned a while ago that to add two fractions or subtract fractions, you must make sure they have a common denominator. But what is a common denominator? A common denominator is a number with which both of the denominators share at least one factor that is not the number 1. For example, if the denominators are 4 and 7, then a common denominator is 28. 28 shares the factors 1, 2, and 4 with the number 4, and the factors 1 and 7 with the number 7. Now let's have this example. 3 over 8 plus 5 over 16. What can you multiply each fraction by to give the smallest common denominator? The denominators are 8 and 16. The smallest number that has both of these as factors is 16. Let's have the first fraction. 8 goes into 16 two times. So 3 over 8 times 2 over 2 equals 6 over 16. So let's put it down here. Now let's go to the second fraction. 16 goes into 16 one time. So 5 over 16 times 1 over 1 equals 5 over 16. Let's put it down here. Once you have a common denominator, add the numerators. 6 plus 5 equals 11. Then copy the common denominator 16. The answer is 11 over 16. The same goes for subtraction. Let's have the same fractions as example. 3 over 8 minus 5 over 16. The smallest number that has both of these as factors is 16. Let's have the first fraction first. 8 goes into 16 two times. That means 3 over 8 times 2 over 2 equals 6 over 16. Let's put it down here. Then the second fraction. 16 goes into 16 one time. So 5 over 16 times 1 over 1 equals 5 over 16. Let's write it down here. Once you have a common denominator, subtract the numerators. 6 minus 5 equals 1. Then copy the common denominator 16. Thus, the answer is 1 over 16. Now, what if we have this fraction? 210 over 56. These numbers get pretty big. What if we needed to multiply again? Let's make the fraction more simple, so it will be easier to use in the future. We have to divide by the greatest common factor. But what is a common factor? A factor is a number that can be divided into another number with no remainder. For example, 8's factors are 1, 2, 4, and 8. 3 is not a factor of 8 because 8 is not evenly divisible by 3. Because 8 divided by 3 equals 2 with remainder 3. A common factor is a factor that two numbers have in common. For example, 7 is a factor of both 21 and 105, so it is a common factor of the two. The greatest common factor is the largest factor that the two numbers share. So let's go back to our simplification problem from before. We have the fraction 28 over 72. We have to divide both numerator and denominator by the greatest common factor. The factors of 28 are 1, 2, 4, 7, 14, and 28. The factors of 72 are 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 9, 12, 18, 24, 48, and 72. Their greatest common factor is 4. Now let's divide the fraction, the numerator and denominator, but by 4, their greatest common factor. 28 divided by 4 equals 7. 72 divided by 4 equals 18. So, 28 over 72 equals 7 over 18. Let's have a review. First, a fraction has a numerator and a denominator. Second, the denominator can never be 0. Third, you can multiply, divide, add, and subtract fractions. Fourth, a common factor is a number that both denominators are evenly divisible by. And lastly, a common denominator is a number that both denominators share a factor with. That's all for our topic. Thank you for listening and goodbye.